Alright guys, welcome back. This time I'm going to show you guys how to do some basic lighting, and although the light tools in Maya are very simple, the render settings for those light tools can be very complicated. So I'm just going to use the simplest render settings that we can do just for beginning purposes to get some lighting going and make sure that you can illuminate your scene and make it look good. So to start off with, our view mode is going to be important again here, where we've got number 4 for wireframe, 5 for smooth, and we learned 6 for texture. These things currently don't have any texture on them, but just 6 for texture. 7 will initiate the lighting preview for the scene. You can see I've already got high quality turned on here. It's not really going to matter. There's no appreciable difference between these two when it comes to the actual window here. We're going to need to render these shots regularly in order to see what's actually being produced in Maya. And so those render settings are right up here. These 4 little clappers up at the top, we've got this one on the left hand side will bring up the render window. This one will render the shot. So here's what our camera is currently seeing with no lighting whatsoever. By the way, this is Maya default lighting. It's what they give you if you don't put any lights in the scene, so just be aware of that. I can go ahead and save that for comparison's sake. This render clapper is also here in this actual video window, so you can click that to refresh the render over and over again, and we can save a render right here, throw a render away, so that we can compare them side by side down in the bottom bar here. Skipping over the IPR button, this last one over here is the actual render settings window, and this is what's going to be important for us today. If we don't set the render settings properly, we either won't be able to have certain types of shadows. For instance, I'm going to use ray trace shadows this time, or our image will not be at a high enough quality to look nice. So just right off the bat, the first thing I want to do is have you open up this render settings window. And under render using, we're going to select Maya software, just so that's a nice simple thing. Although what I tend to use is Mental Ray, which may not even appear in your version of Maya right now because it's a plugin that you have to enable. But Maya software is what we're going to use. Then click over to this Maya software tab, and under quality, just turn that up to production quality. That's going to enable us to have a little bit nicer renders when we hit the button. And then the very last thing that you want to do is go down to this ray tracing quality section, and then just click ray tracing so that it's on. That's going to enable us to get sharp shadows as opposed to using depth map shadows, which is a different type of shadow. Okay, so as long as you've opened that up and clicked that and turned quality to production quality, we're done with this window. You can close that. Okay, I'm going to leave this window open for most of the lecture because this is where we're actually going to see our differences as we demonstrate lights, but I am going to have to move it off and bring it back on several times so that we can position things in this view. Alright, so let's put in some lights into the scene. So here's our default. I'm going to move that off to the side for a second. Up in our Create menu, just like we do with polygons, you can come down to this light section, and these are all of the available lights within Maya. The ones that I most frequently use are direction, point, and spot. I use ambient light, sometimes area light if it's a very fancy scene, maybe with local light sources such as what are the office lights that are rather large up in the ceiling. Volume light I almost never use, but let's run through these really quickly. Point light's going to be the easiest one, so go ahead and activate that one first. A point light is just a little point in the scene, like a candle that you can position wherever you want, and it illuminates in all directions. So this entire sphere around this point is illuminating, and you can see as I move it past these objects, they're being illuminated from different perspectives here. Okay, I can move it under the ground, above the ground. Okay, so let's go ahead and render that so we can see the difference here. And you can see you get this kind of vague general directional light, but it does diverge because it is local to the scene. If we place this very far away, it would start to act like a sort of pseudo-directional or pseudo-spotlight. But this one's pretty easy to visualize. Just wherever you put it, that's where the illumination comes from. I'm going to save that one. There are certain sliders and attributes for each one of these lights, and a lot of them are the same. I'm going to just hide this note section because I never use that anyway. So we've got the type up here. For our demonstration's sake, I'm going to change this type to the other sort so that I can show you what they do. But in practice, what I and a lot of my friends have noticed working with Maya is that if you duplicate lights or if you change these types from light to light, sometimes you can get really weird behaviors within Maya. I'm not sure if the latest versions of Maya have fixed those problems or not, but we typically will just create a new light whenever we want to change the type. Okay. Here we've got the color of the light, so I can actually pick any color that I want for that. So let's just make like a purplish light here. You can see that it's affected the scene. If I hit render, we get a purplish light. Note that the value for the light will affect the intensity. So in this case, this purple has dropped the value quite a bit. And so if I turn that back up, that's for full intensity purple light now. Okay. We have an intensity slider which is separate from the color. Turning this above 1 is typical, but if you go too high, it begins to blow out and become very, very, very white, very washed out. At a maximum of 10 there, we can enter in higher numbers, I believe. Yeah, but it starts to get pretty ridiculous after a certain amount of time. Turning this number below 1 is also typical for more subtle effects. This is probably very hard to see on the video. Let me turn it to a brighter color and try that. So we can just barely see that at a 0.3 intensity. But for things like a fill light or a nighttime light or something like that, that is definitely a common use. Okay. There are a number of buttons here: illuminates by default, emit diffuse, emit specular. These are for special cases if you want lights to do special things. For now, just leave these alone. Make sure they're all turned on. But know that those would disable parts of a light. It would not illuminate objects, for instance, or would not emit diffuse lights or specular light. The decay rate is somewhat important for us now. It becomes more important when you want to make fancier scenes with multiple light sources, but essentially the decay rate will allow this light source to be dimmer the farther away from the source that it is. So I'm going to turn this back up to an intensity of 1. There we go. And I'll turn on a linear decay rate. There are four options. No decay at all, which makes it infinite. Linear decay, which will drop off from 1 or full intensity to 0 over, I'm not really sure what distance it uses, but yeah, over a certain distance. A quadratic decay, which is even faster, and a cubic decay, which is very, very fast. Changing these will require that you turn the intensity number up by multiples of itself over and over and over again to even register any light. So let's just demonstrate that now. I'll click onto linear and render. And as you can see, we can only get just a little bit of this corner over here because that's where this light is located, and a tiny bit of this cylinder. So that's at an intensity of 1. So you can immediately see the difference between 1 intensity with no decay and 1 intensity with linear decay. So I'll turn this up to 10. And we'll see if we can get closer to, a little bit closer to the original illumination. But you can see it's much more localized. The bottom corner is glowing pretty brightly, and the distant areas of this plane are very dark. So maybe it was something like 8 or so to get a reasonable facsimile like that. So if I turn this to quadratic, again, the same thing happens. We've got this bright illuminated area and it quickly falls off to almost nothing. Let me turn this up to, let's say, like 40 this time. And there we go. So 40 illuminates this area and then it quickly falls off into what appears to me to be pure black at the back of this plane. So you can see a very, very quick transition there. And then if I turn it up to cubic, same thing again, and I probably have to do like 200 or so. Yeah, to get the same type of illumination effect. So here we've got a very hot spotlight here, and then a fade off to pure black essentially as soon as it passes these objects. If I were to turn this back down to linear now, yeah, we just get a stark white scene, or even worse, no decay at all. Not really much of a change there. So I'll turn that back to 1. So just know those are the types of numbers that you're going to have to deal with if you start using decay. Decay is important if you have local light sources in a scene, such as light bulbs or lamps, something that needs to softly glow. or even if you're trying to get like a moody atmosphere, maybe a more foggy location or something like that. Let's assume for now that none of these other options are important to us. Shadows will be important, but for now we'll just assume that it's this first section that we're looking at, so I can quickly demonstrate the other light types. So that's a point light, one of the most commonly used light types in Maya. Let's go ahead and change this to the next one, a directional light. Okay, so directional light looks like these big perpendicular arrows, and essentially what it does is it just points light in a certain direction all throughout the scene. So it doesn't matter where this is positioned in the scene. That's irrelevant. Only the angle that this thing occurs at is important. So let me render that. So you can kind of see that at a certain angle, all of these objects are being illuminated equally, the same amount from whatever side I turn this to face. Okay, so this one must be very near 90 degrees because it's glancing across the base there and making it invisible. There we go, it's a little bit more visible now. In fact, if I turn this like upward, we might not see anything except for the sphere. Yeah, there we go. And if I make it look directly down the direction of the camera like this, it's going to give us a very, very flat look for these objects here, except for the plane down there because it's still glancing. Okay, so this one's all just about the angle that you want to aim the light. It's most useful for the sun outdoors or maybe the sky. Big, broad light sources that shine over a large distance are what you want to use this for in general. Okay, and again, we've got the color and intensity. No drop off for this one because since it doesn't have a location, there's no distance for it to drop off over, so you can't make this one drop off. Okay, this one can also cast shadows though, of course. Let's look at the next one. Lights and spotlight. Okay. Oh, I just created one. Oh, that's okay. I'll delete this one. All right, spotlight. A spotlight is like a point light, but it's aimed down a little cone. Okay, so only that cone is what will be illuminated. So if I render this, we should just get a tiny little spot right on the ground behind those geometric primitives. So if I can move this up a bit, let's see. You can see we're only getting a small section of our scene rendered when I activate that one. I'm going to have to pull out a little bit more so that we can get this somewhere useful in our scene. Push it back a little bit. It's aimed a little bit towards camera. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so I've got the sphere in the scene there, and I want you to see the object here, so I'll just pull out a little bit farther. There we go. So a spotlight is definitely a very, very useful light because of its ability to aim. It's not casting any light anywhere except for this one cone. We've got some of the same options here, color and intensity. Decay rate does the same thing as the point light did. This spot and anything that encounters this cone will get dimmer and dimmer the farther away it goes. But this one has some special settings. Cone angle, penumbra, and drop off. Okay? Cone angle is exactly what it sounds like. It is the angle of the spotlight cone. Okay, so wider or thinner. I've just made it wider so we get more of the objects into the scene. Okay? The penumbra angle is sort of a softening angle, and this can be either negative or positive. If it's positive, then it will start from the edge of this, this cone and then move outward and illuminate a little bit more, but it will also fall off as it illuminates. So here I've turned it up to, let's just do like almost 5 degrees. And you can see that here this is all still perfectly illuminated, but out it goes dimmer and dimmer and dimmer until it finally falls off to nothing. If you do the opposite and make it a negative number, it will start at the rim and dim from there inward. Okay, so you can see that that has become the dim edge and the inner part is the sharp portion. Okay, so oftentimes I like to use negative numbers on the penumbra angle. I don't like to use positive numbers oftentimes. I just think that it's easier to think that that's the maximum cone angle and that I'm taking away from it a little bit. Okay, and the more the number is turned up or down, the wider that softening effect will be. Okay, The last one, drop off, will create a sort of softening effect on the spotlight as well, but in a different way. So here, the entire spotlight is affected. The very center is the 100% opacity spot for this, and then the higher the number, the faster it will become completely dark. So if I turn this up a lot, we might hardly get anything. Yeah, just a little tiny little spot there. And if I leave it relatively low, like single digits, you can just barely see a subtle darkening of this disk toward the outer edge. Let's see if I can get it. There we go. So you can see it's still a clean cut here because the penumbra angle is at 0, but it becomes about 50% opacity light towards the edge of this spot here. So you can combine both of them to get a very, very subtle lighting effect or a more realistic lighting effect if you want to. So a little bit of that, a little bit of drop off, turning up the cone angle a lot. Maybe I went a little bit crazy with the drop off. Turn that down a little bit. There we go. So we've got an overall illumination effect without the harsh edge of the spotlight now. Okay? So that's the spotlight. That's a really fun one. I'll go ahead and create another. So the next one, I'm going to do ambient light. And ambient light is an interesting one because it isn't supposed to matter where you put this ambient light, but it actually does. You can kind of see it behaving like a point light. But what it's supposed to do is ignore where it is in the scene and just illuminate all faces semi-equally. So this is meant to penetrate through objects to just sort of light things up wherever they might be to take away the harsh darkness of shadows. Okay, so I tend to position an ambient light either high above the scene, way up there. There you can see it kind of softening the entire effect of the scene, or sometimes even like below the ground or something, because it should still illuminate, although you do get that effect sometimes. So high above the scene tends to be a good one. If you place it near objects, you might end up seeing a little highlight on those objects, so it can kind of act like a point light sometimes, although that's not what it's intended for. Color and intensity again. Ambient shade, I'm not really sure how that's different from intensity, but let's just try that. Okay, it appears the more the ambient shade, the harsher the turning shadows on objects are. So if I turn this all the way down to 0, there we go. We get that nice flat effect that I was talking about of overall illumination everywhere. The default for that was like 0.45, so I might turn this down to get a very, very soft effect over the entire scene, because this one I typically use as just sort of a shadow softening, or a way to get rid of very, very dark, harsh shades in my scene, and oftentimes I use that as a very low intensity. So this would be establishing like my darkest dark point for some scene that I was illuminating. Okay, so that's an ambient light. Delete that one. And let's see, we've got area and volume light. Area light is a fun one because it is like a spotlight, I suppose, or like a directional light, but it has a shape of its own. So here you can see it's got this square shape to it. It's emitting light in the direction of this little radiant here, and it's emitting it diffusely as well. So the effect of an area light can be really pleasant. Okay, so there's the effect that we're getting right now, sort of like that really wide spotlight that I did earlier. I use this one most when I'm simulating light and making lights bounce around and colors pick up on objects, things that we're not really going to get into in this tutorial. But you can think of this like those diffuse office lights that you see in a ceiling sometimes. We've got color and intensity as well as decay rate again. But somewhere in here there should be the shape that we can affect. I'm not really sure where it is, but I know that we can turn this into a disk instead of a square. I'm just not really sure where it is right now. Well, it's somewhere in there. I'm going to link you guys to a full tutorial on all sorts of lighting things, and I believe that they go over it in there. But just know that it doesn't have to be this shape. You can set it to a number of different shapes. The scale of this thing does matter, by the way. So if I make this smaller, then the effect of the light is going to be lessened. If I make this much, much bigger, the effect of the light is going to be magnified. And this is one of the few lights where scale does matter for that. You can also do things like scale it to be a very, very thin disk. Oh, I thought I could. For some reason, it's not doing it right now. Okay, strange. But you can scale this into non-square shapes and make it like little bands of light. I'm just not sure why it's being... Maybe I need to do object mode. Ah, there we go. Okay, I was in the wrong mode for my scaling tool. So you can end up getting this like neon sign tubes or something like that. So let me go ahead and angle this almost straight down. There, you can see it kind of worked. Let me do it even thinner. Really, really thin. Not quite what I was after, but you get the idea. Ah, there we go. Sort of a band of light there. Okay, so this could be helpful for certain problem solving in your scenes. What you should know is that the area light can be more time consuming to render because it is a diffuse light. It's one of the more complicated lights, as well as a volume light, the very last one I'm going to show you. Those two can take a lot more rendering time than the other lights can. Okay, let's go ahead and do the last one. Last one is a volume light, and this actually creates a volume. And it can illuminate out from the inside out or the outside in. So right now, I don't see anything. If I expand this out so that the scene is inside that, we should start to see it. It might not be bright enough. Let's see if that helps. Or actually, this might not be supported by Maya software, now that I think about it. Let me just try that. I'll go to Mental Ray really quick. Ah, okay, so apparently that one isn't supported by Maya software. I wasn't aware of that. I typically use Mental Ray, so I'm able to use any of these lights that I prefer, but I guess we'll have to just make sure that you guys don't use the volume light. That's okay, though, because it has some dubious uses, in my opinion. It doesn't represent like how light really works. It's illuminating only within this particular volume, and so I usually don't like to use it anyway. But just for a demonstration's sake, we've got different light shapes here. We can make it a box instead of a sphere. So let me scale this down, see if we can get that to show. Kind of. It is softening near the edges, so it's not really that visible. But we do have a cylinder and a cone that we can also use. Okay, sphere is the default. Turn that up again. And we've got, let me see, down here, the volume direction outward right now. We could set it to inward. Which is really weird. It should be illuminating from the edges of this thing, but it appears to have only picked down, or from the lower to upper angle, even though there's an arrow from the top there. Yeah, I don't know. This confuses me, this one. Let's try down like that. Yeah, now it is illuminating from the top, so it appears the closer you are to the edge of this sphere, the more it illuminates. But that's a really weird use for a light, and I really can't think of a practical use for it, but just be aware that it exists. I'm going to change this back to software for the remainder of our demonstration, though. Okay, so that's it for the types of light. There are really only those 6: ambient, directional, point, spot, area, and volume. Let me show you how to cast shadows with a light. And I'm going to pick first a directional light, and then we'll do a spotlight as well. Okay, so here's a directional light again in my scene. And I'm going to put it down at a sort of angle so that we can illuminate more than one side of the cube and get a nice view of it. I'll go ahead and move my camera into a nice close location so that we can see this clearly. There we go. That's all of the objects illuminated by the directional light without a shadow, and I'll save that. Open up the Shadows tab in any of the lights that support this, and first you're going to get a shadow color. I'll come back to that as soon as we're casting one, but I don't recommend changing the shadow color like ever. People try to use this to lighten their shadows, but it ends up looking really fake, and there are better ways to do it with multiple lights. The first section here is the depth map shadows. I don't like to use these all the time because I feel like I have less control, but we can enable those and we can use them. You'll see shadows are cast right here. The reason I don't like to use them is because they're resolution based. So this 512 number here is pixels. It's using 512 pixels for the whole scene worth of shadows that it has to render. So if I turn this lower, you can begin to see, let's say like 64, you can begin to see artifacting in the shadows. So imagine that you were doing a really big like city scene or something like that. The 512, I believe it was, default, is not going to be enough resolution for a large city scene. So you're going to end up having to turn this number up and up and up, and that becomes costly eventually. So I don't like to use these, although these are the default shadows for Maya. They turn out fine. For our purposes, it's not really going to matter, but let me show you the other one. Okay, so I'm going to turn that one off and scroll down. The ray trace shadows area we can enable, and we'll get a very similar result, but the difference is that these are mathematic, so they're being cast with rays across the objects, and they're as sharp as the objects are, which I like a lot more. We can also create a artificial sort of blurring effect with this light angle. So if I turn that up, ooh, okay, I turned it way too far up, but you can see that the lights have suddenly become very, very soft, but also very granular. Let me turn that light angle back down to something more reasonable again. There we go. So near the objects, how about a little bit farther down? I'll do like 10. Near the objects, these shadows are sharper, and farther away from the object, these shadows are blurrier. And that is very similar to what happens in reality when you have light sources shown on things. The reason it's so granular, though, is because I only have one shadow ray right now being cast, and this number needs to be turned up significantly before you see a big quality jump. So let me save that one, render again. And you can see these have smoothed out, although they are still kind of splotchy. I'm going to save that and turn this up to something like 20. Okay, you're seeing it's taking a lot longer to render, but the shadow quality has jumped significantly. Let me draw your attention down to the bottom of the frame where we've got these numbers written. The size I'm currently rendering at is Maya default 640 by 480 pixels. We're on frame 1 of the scene. That's not going to change unless we start doing animation. We're rendering from the perspective camera, which is this one. But right here it shows me the render time, 4 seconds to render that. Perfect, but we're only rendering primitive, so it really shouldn't take any time at all. If I go back to those other tests, you're going to see it was 2 seconds to render the shadows with a little bit of granularity right there. And it was probably 1 second when it was extremely grainy. And it was 1 second without any shadows. So I've quadrupled the render time with one light with primitives in the scene just by turning this number up to 20. So you can imagine what will happen when you have a really, really nice scene with lots of light sources, lots of textured objects. This can quickly balloon up to several minutes worth of rendering time for a single shot, especially if you're simulating light or using caustics or something. For our purposes, a single frame image to render should not take you more than a minute. If it ever takes more than a minute with just default scenes, Maya software, just using simple lights, you're doing something wrong, probably using excessive numbers of lights. Okay, so just be aware of that. If your render time for now gets over a minute, probably you need to simplify your scene somewhat. All right, so those shadows look really, really nice cast from this directional light, and if I change the direction, we will see, let's try something a little bit farther straight down, we'll see the shadows move in that direction as well. Okay, so you can see that that's a tremendous quality jump from not having any shadows. It gives these objects a really nice sense of being grounded in the particular scene. Let's go ahead and make a spotlight with shadows. So here's my spotlight. I'm going to make it somewhat farther away from the objects. There we go. Let's see what we got there. Okay, I've got most of the objects within the shot. There. Okay, that's going to be fine. And I'll move my camera closer. Render them. Okay, and I'll increase the penumbra angle a little bit as well. Cool. Let's turn on shadows for the spotlight. Use ray trace shadows. There we go. And turning up the light radius. about there? Okay, and shadow rays, maybe I could get away with like 15, and it should still look nice. And there you can see a much more realistic look to these objects cast like that. Okay, this ray trace shadow section is only active if in your render settings, when we were in the Maya software tab, you went down into ray tracing quality and turned this button on. If this is off, there will be no ray trace shadows, but the other version will still work. So make sure that you leave that on if you want this to render with ray trace shadows, and that is what I want when you guys do your homework. Okay, you can optionally also in this common tab change the image format and change the size of the image if you'd like to. We can change this to any one of these presets, or you can enter in your own custom size. 640x480 is actually pretty small, but it's great for doing tests because it's small enough that things are usually going to render pretty quickly. If I'm doing something that takes a rather long time, I even turn it down to 320x240 for test purposes. But yeah, something like this, 1K square is perfectly fine. Full 1024 is getting a little bit big for our purposes, but yeah, you can leave it at defaults if you want to. Okay, with some of these lights, in particular Spotlight is what I like to use this for. You can cast a cookie in the light. What a cookie is, I believe it's called a gobo in the theater, or just a cutout is what you can think of it as on the light, to give the appearance that maybe light is shining through trees or through a mesh netting or something like that, to give this a little bit more interest. So right now we've got a solid spotlight here. Let me make sure I'm still in that angle. Okay, great, and I'll save that. These attributes here, color intensity, cone angle, penumbra angle, you'll notice they have a little node connection here, just like our textures did last time. Well, that means that we can click on that, and we can create a render node for that. So I'm going to hook up a fractal into the color. There it is. And when I render, you can see it almost looks like we're shining a light through smoke or through dense water or something like that. And I can alter these to be more subtle or more harsh or whatever it is I want to do. And the results will be shown here, like maybe that's a rainy window or something like that, where we've got a bit of turbulence shining through there. I definitely encourage you guys to do that if it's important in your scene. If not, you know, a more subtle treatment of having no particular texture on the light is very typical. That's what happens most of the time, but every now and then you want something like this, a pattern cast from a lamp or through slatted blinds or something like that, and you don't have the objects, you just want the effect. This is a great way to do the effect. You can put this on either the color or the intensity if for some reason you wanted a certain color of light. So I could break this. I could say this light is green. I could put this on the intensity instead, and I should get a pattern as well. Let's try cloth. There we go. So now it's green, but in a cloth pattern as well. So I tend to put this on color just because oftentimes it's easier. But if you do want to control the color and the pattern, do it on intensity and you should get a better result. Okay, cool. Let me take a look at my notes and see what else I want to show. Okay, two more things. If you have a scene with multiple lights, so let me go ahead and create a second light here. I'll do a directional light. We'll make it go this way, and so that we can tell the difference, I'll make this one bluish. Okay, and I'll do another one, point light, over on this side, and I'll make this one yellowish. Okay, so this might end up being a little bit of a mess, but we've got three lights in our scene all combining together. You can see we get the kind of composite effect. That's kind of neat with the green cloth and everything. But you'll notice that some of these things have a composite effect. So the point light is yellow. The green spotlight and the blue directional light are all hitting the surface in the same place here. The two lights that are not the spotlight are both combining here and here. Only the yellow point light is here, and for the most part only the directional light is hitting over here. Sometimes for adjustment's sake you may want certain lights to only illuminate certain things in the scene. So let's say, for instance, I would like my directional light and my point light to only illuminate the objects and not the ground. So first, I really should name these things so that I can pick them out in a list. So there's the ground. That one's polycylinder, polysphere, polycube. They already have a default name that helps. This one is directional light 1, point light 1, and that one's going to be spotlight 1. Okay. So there's a menu that will help us to establish what is being illuminated by what, regardless of where it is in the scene. Okay? We're going to go up to Window Relationship Editors, Light Linking, and we have two choices for the type of menu we see, a light-centric menu or an object-centric menu. I'm just going to use the light-centric menu. It doesn't really change very much, but it will bring up a window that looks like this, which is a list on the left-hand side of all the lights in the scene, and on the right-hand side of all of the objects and materials in the scene. So you can restrict these to only certain materials, which can be useful as well. So selecting my spotlight illuminates everything. The directional light is illuminating everything, but I don't want it to shine on the ground, so I just click that to remove it. And for the point light, I want the same thing. I'm going to remove the point light from the ground. Okay, that's all you need to do. No need to close the window or anything like that. It's all committed. And if I hit render, now you can see that the point light is no longer illuminating the rest of the ground, and neither is the directional light. You can see the effect here, but not here. Okay, so that can be helpful for fine-tuning a certain scene, or if you want certain special effects, or something is being illuminated that you didn't want to. That's a quick and easy way to do it. Again, this is more of a special cases type of menu. You don't need this all the time, but if you do need it, it's here for you. So that was, again, Window, Relationship Editors, Light Linking, and I just use the light-centric one most of the time. If I do object-centric, see, it really just flips these two. This is illuminated by these, and you can turn them off, but whatever. I mean, they're both useful. Okay, the last thing I'm going to show you is a typical established way of making a nice looking lit scene. This is called a 3-point lighting setup. It's used in theater oftentimes, and it's a good way to just think about things in a very simplistic way when you start to approach lighting things for the first time. Essentially what we're going to try to do is get a brightest side and a darkest side and a transition side on the things that we're illuminating. Okay? So you can use, if you want to, all 3 directional lights, all 3 point lights, all 3 spotlights, or you can use some combination of the 3. It's going to be successful no matter what you do. I'm going to use for my primary light a point. Okay, so this light is going to be the brightest light. It's going to be where the light source is coming from in my scene, and so we call it a key light. All right. If we were outside, this would be the sun. All right. So let's treat it like it's the sun. I've got the key light shape. I want to go to, no, I do want key light shape. I want to change this color then to be slightly warmer. I'm going to turn it to a yellow spectrum and actually give it a good amount of warmth there. That's actually quite a bit more. I don't want it to decay because the sun is essentially infinitely far away and the light is essentially infinitely bright. It doesn't really decay in our visible area here on Earth. It does over through space, but it's not going to affect us. So I'm going to place it away from the scene, no decay, and I'm going to try to pick an angle which illuminates one face more than the others and gives me a turning shadow side. So you can clearly see there's a dark side over here, and I'm going to try to angle it so that particularly on this cube we get a brightest, darkest, and a middle tone, just like that. Let me go ahead and render that and see what that looks like. I'm going to need to fly my camera in, or actually let me show you one more thing before we get underway with this. I'm going to create a camera and I'm going to render from that camera instead. Okay, so I'm going to go up to the scene, create camera, it's right next to lights, and just use this top one for now. The rest of these do special case things. Camera up at the top is all we're going to need, and then you can see we get a little camera icon in the scene. I'm going to rename this camera to Shot Cam. Okay, and in panels up here I'm going to go Perspective Shot Cam, and control it just like a normal camera. But for this one, I'm going to park it right in my rendering view and then just not move it anymore. I'm going to leave this one as my specialized rendering camera. So here I've driven it over to a nice angle. I'm going to hit render. You can see now the camera is shot cam. And as long as I don't close this, even if I change this window, it should continue rendering from shot cam. So if I rotate this camera way over to the back here and then hit render again, it's still shot cam. Okay, so just leave this open, don't close it, and no matter where you move in your scene now, and try not to move this of course, I can go and adjust and select things, move around, fly through my scene, and I'll still be getting a consistent output here. Okay, cool. So that's my key light. So it's supposed to be my brightest light in the scene. This is a medium brightness right now. This looks fine. I'm not going to know if it's bright enough until I get other lights in the scene, but probably I'm going to want to turn it up a little bit. Let me try almost 2. That's pretty nice. Okay, that's a nice bright illuminated scene. Okay. Let's put in my second light now. My second light is going to control the shadows. Oh, actually, first I need to cast some shadows here with my primary light. Typically in your scenes, unless you're doing an indoor shot with like multiple bright sources, you want only one of these lights to be casting shadows, typically. So for this one, I'm going to illuminate its shadows. I know I'm going to need a bit of radius. I know I'm going to need around 15 or 16 samples. Let's see, do I want to move this a little bit more to the side? Yeah, that looks a bit better. Okay, so now I'm casting shadows from this primary light. It's illuminating. You can see the shadows are pure black. I'm going to save this one so that we can see that's what we're getting with just one light source. And let's create a second light in the scene. This one is going to be our fill light. So it's going to fill the shadows. It's going to give us something in those shadows, a texture, a tone, so that it's not complete darkness. And for that, I'm going to use an ambient light, because that's kind of what the ambient lights are for. I'm going to move the ambient light away and up towards the shadow side of the objects, even though the direction shouldn't matter too much. I might turn the ambient shade down here. And if we were doing this outdoors, if we were out in the open sky with the sun, this would be like the sky. The sky you don't normally think of as a light source, but it is. The sky is very diffuse. We know the overall color is blue because of the vibration of the air changes the way that light is moved through, the air. And the sun shines on our atmosphere, it diffuses through the atmosphere, and the light shines from basically everywhere. Okay, so this is what an ambient light is for. It's shining basically everywhere. So I'm going to say this is our fill light. And I'm going to change this to a blue. I don't really want to turn down the volume or the value. I just want to make it more blue. There we go. And probably the intensity is going to be too high. So let's render this to C. See, that's very washed out right now, but look what the nice effect it's having on our shadows there. So I'm going to turn down the intensity at least by half, so 0.5. There you can see our illuminated side is taking over dominance again, and our shadow side is softened but not completely black. I'm going to keep turning it down to like 0.3. Okay, and now let me also try turning down the ambient shade. Okay, so we got a little bit of we had a little bit of difference between the side of this cone and the base there, and now it's completely gone. So I liked that. It was just a bit too strong. Let me do 0.2 and see if that helps. I can almost see it a little bit more. Might end up going all the way back to 0.4. There we go. Just a little bit of it back so we get a slightly darker angle on the two sides of these turning objects. But you can see that this has illuminated our shadow side just a little bit, tinted it blue just a little bit, and also affected the tone of our overall scene. I've still got a mostly yellow scene, and that's because the amount of yellow and the amount of blue that I chose is not quite in balance with each other. So for my yellow light, I probably need to turn the saturation down a bit. There we go. We're almost back to a perfect gray now. A balance between the yellow on this side and the blue on that side. But the places where it's more illuminated are more yellow, and the places where it's more shady are more blue. Okay, so this is getting very close to like a naturalistic light. So let's save that one. If you see, we can compare. That was our single light source. That's with two of them, and it's looking a lot nicer now. Okay, the third one, the third light, is sort of a dramatic light. It's the one that highlights the rim of objects, picks it up and separates the dark side of the objects from the background, or highlights the light side and makes it stand out and look very vibrant and flashy. So for this one, I like to use either a spotlight or directional light. Let's do a directional this time. And this light should, in general, face somewhat towards your camera, but also aim towards, let's say, the shadow side in this case. I'm also going to aim this up slightly so that it does not hit the top surface of this ground and therefore should not affect it. It should only be affecting the side of the cylinder, the side of the sphere, and the side of the cube, maybe. We'll see. And this one, when you're doing it for like a stage production or something like that, can be a very vibrant color, like a bright hot red or blue or something like that. For our purposes, I'm going to leave it close to white. Let's see, should I make it some color? Let's make it slightly green. Okay, so a little bit green like that. And let's see what we get from that angle. Ooh, got a nice subtle effect there. That's pretty nice. I could use a little bit more angle on it though. So I'm going to push it a bit farther. That's looking pretty nice. We're not really getting the effect on the cube because it's flat faces, but we do have a number 1, number 2, number 3 value on that, which is fine. It's what I want. Yeah, and if it was beveled, oh, actually, you know what? Let me just do that. I'll bevel the cube. All of the faces here. That's too much bevel. There we go. It's going to be a really subtle thing. 0.02. Let me render that again. There we go. Now those edges of the cube are picking up the highlights of the light. We're getting a little dark shadow there. We're getting a little bit of the highlight picked up over on this side. I can't really see any of this kicker light over on this side though. Part of it is that that kicker light is supposed to be intense, like actually really bright. So let me turn this up to like 3. And you can see how much more vibrant that is compared to a scene that doesn't contain it. So there it is without, here it is with also the bevel, which cheats it a little bit. So here it is, 1 light in the scene, 2 lights in the scene, a key and a fill, 3 lights in the scene, a key, a fill, and a kicker light. Now this is for a more dramatic, volumetric, nice looking rendered result. There's a lot of different ways to light a scene to make it look natural. One of the things we're going to do in class is to look at different photographs of real situations and decide what type of lighting we would use to reproduce it. The colors, the angles, the type of light, that sort of thing. And it ends up being quite a puzzle sometimes because it can be tricky to analyze those situations. But now you have the basic tools for creating your own lighting. You should be able to create your own renders. One last note, if you do want to save these images out, we can just go up to File, Save Image, and then you've got the options for location and file type there. The default, I believe, is an IFF file. Oh, this one says JPEG here. My IFFs are only openable in FCheck, which is it comes along with the Maya software and should be openable from the programs list, but I usually just use a JPEG or something if I just want to save an image out. Okay? All right, that's all the information for this week. Your homework is going to be to create a small lit scene. I'm going to set it so that the scene has to contain like ground and walls and like 3 objects minimum. But we're going to try to make a very simplified little scene, light it up. We're not going to have to do materials this week. We'll try to combine that stuff in the near future. Okay?